There are many ways to fund a startup. I talk a lot about the specific way, the angel and venture journey, but there are many other ways you can do it. In this video, we'll look at all the ways you can fund your startup, a total overview. This is Raw Startup. I'm the founder of Vivino, the world's largest wine app and community with over 60 million users all over the world. And I've tried almost everything on this list. We go through 8 different ways, all the pros, all the cons, and also what stage you should use the different ways of funding. We'll have a full table of options depending on what stage you're at. With that, let's get started. Bootstrapping, basically self-funding, relying on personal savings or revenue. Almost all companies do some kind of bootstrapping during the early stage of a startup. Some startups are hard to build fully bootstrapped. Take a free service like a Facebook or Vivino, there's basically no revenue coming in the beginning, so that's hard to do bootstrapped. On the other side, you have a B2B SaaS company, at least they charge for the first client that comes in, a little bit easier to do bootstrapped. On the pros, there's full control, no investor messing with anything, no equity loss. Obviously, no investors coming in, you'll still own all the company. Creates focus and discipline. Bootstrap companies have to be very, very focused and only do the most important things. They have limited resources, which also requires some fiscal discipline. I think that's super healthy. Cons, slower growth. Obviously not a lot of money to grow the company. Less support. There will be fewer people that are involved in the company, which means you get less support. Recruitment challenges. Sometimes you want to attract people that have a high salary, and that's hard to do when you're bootstrapped. Okay, looking at the stages. Bootstrapping usually is idea, angel, and seed phase, usually not later than that. Examples, 37 Signals. It's their entire philosophy, and they've been very successful in building products like Basecamp. Venture Studio. It is a studio where they build startups, sometimes called a startup studio. Like an in-house startup creation, providing resources, expertise, and support. Let's get straight to pros and cons. Pros, extensive support. You're part of a studio with people that are experienced. There's a lot of support. Reduced risk. With all this support, risk goes down. Cons, equity loss at an early stage. And I think this is a problem for some of these studios. They tend to take too big a chunk of the companies at a too early stage. And that's a problem for future funding. Less decision-making freedom. There's going to be people around you to help you make decisions, for good or bad. This is an early stage thing, mostly idea and angel stage. Examples of venture studios are BetaWorks, Idea Lab, and Atomic. Some of the companies built in these venture studios are Giphy, as well as Hims and Hers. Incubator, Accelerator. These are programs offering resources, mentorship, and sometimes funding for early stage startups. These are very popular and can be very useful. The most famous in the world is probably Y-Combinator. They offer both a program, real funding, as well as support on getting more funding. Pros, support, mentorship, and education. Especially for younger and less experienced founders, this is really valuable. Credibility. Getting into a program like Y-Combinator is like a stamp of approval of your startup. It will help you a lot in many ways, and especially funding. Cons, very competitive. It is hard to get into the good programs. Limited time. Sometimes you can be a little bit lost once the program is over. It might only last a few months. Equity or fee. Sometimes they take a bit of equity. Sometimes there's a fee. It varies a little bit. From a stage point of view, this is an early stage again, idea, angel, and seed. Examples are Y-Combinator, 500 Startups, and Techstars. There are also a lot of local players out there. Some of them are good and some of them are, shall we say, less good. Angels and venture capital. This is the traditional journey for a lot of startups. Investment capital from professional investors or firms that fund your startup. It often starts with family and friends, then some angels, and then finally you get venture capital on board. Make sure you check my video on how to find an angel investor. This is what I've done my entire career. It works, but it's not easy. There is constant pressure for growth. It can be fun and you get the ability to build something really big. Pros, unlimited amount of capital. There is just a lot of money out there. Some expertise. Yes, investors can help you, but be careful what you listen to. Credibility, a stamp of approval. When the big venture funds come in, it gives you a stamp of approval. Cons, pressure for growth. Yes, they're going to push for growth at all times, and that might not always be a good idea. Equity loss. This is an equity investment. It's going to cost you. Potential conflicts. Sometimes what's best for you is not the best for the venture fund. There can be a conflict. When it comes to stages, this is basically all stages. Investors don't invest in ideas, but everything else. When you do ideas, maybe family and friends can help. Quick note here before you move on. I talk a lot about fundraising on this channel. There's the video about how to find an angel investor, and then there's the full pitch guide. A lot of good stuff here. Make sure you subscribe. And next, equity crowdfunding. This means raising money from small investor, basically anyone who has a small amount to invest. There are these platforms now that specialize in this. The key here is that this is equity. Whoever invests will own a part of the company. This is actually something something that's growing fast. Legislation in Europe and in the US is changing, making this more available. Pros: large investor pool. Basically anyone can invest and there's a lot of money out there. Marketing and exposure. It's quite cool because customers can become investors and investors become customers. Democratizing investment. Basically gives everyone access to invest in your startup, which is kind of cool. Cons: time and effort. It will take some time to build and market a campaign. Potential negative impact on future funding. True or not, some institutional investors look at this as a low prestige way of funding your company and they're worried about future funding rounds. Complicated compliance. Compliance is changing fast, mostly for the better, but be aware we're selling investments to the public. The rules are strict and so should they be. From a stage point of view, this can be done everywhere. Usually not IDEA, but everywhere else. We have some examples of platforms: Seedrs, Republic, and Crowdcube. A very interesting way to raise money, and I think this is going to grow in the future. Product crowdfunding. This means raising funds by offering rewards and products to small contributors via online platforms. We know this well from Kickstarter. You build a prototype and promise all those investors they will get their product in 2 years. Let's have a look at pros and cons. Pros: exposure and hype. If you do well and run a great campaign, you will get a lot of attention, a lot of hype. These platforms are masters of hype. No equity loss. You're not selling equity, so in theory, the founders could still own the entire company. Community engagement. Get real-life feedback from your customers as you build the product. This can be very valuable. Cons: very competitive. There are a lot of products on these platforms, and it can be hard to get the attention. Limited financial output. You have to spend a lot of the money on delivering whatever you promised and not grow the business. Time and effort. It is very time-consuming to start and run such a campaign. At the same time, keep all the supporters happy. The supporters can be a little bit high maintenance. From a stage point of view, this is a little bit earlier stage, all the way from idea to A round. Examples of platforms are Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Just be a little careful here. This might feel like free money, and it really isn't. You now have a debt to all these supporters, you owe them a product, and at some point you're going to have to send that to them. A lot of startups fail because these campaigns fail. They don't deliver the product, and it all becomes very public. And yes, people tend to get a little bit mad if they don't get what they were promised. Loans. This means borrowing money to grow your startup. Loans just come in many different shapes. It could be a personal loan in the beginning, it could be a government loan later on, and then finally it could be like venture debt where you put money in to grow your startup. If it's like a venture loan, you have to have very predictable revenue. You have to know that I put $1 million in and then I get this out again. This is very hard to do in the early stages. Pros: full control. No investor's going to tell you what to do. No equity loss. Well, no shares are sold, so you still own everything. Cons: hard to get. Borrowing money for a startup is high risk. This means that these loans are hard to get. The bar is high. Can be very expensive. Due to what we said before, this is high risk. The cost is very, very high. So you'll end up paying a lot of interest, and sometimes that interest changes. Like we've seen in the last few years, it went up. And that takes me to the next one. Risky. These high costs just make it risky. You can end up getting killed by these high interest payments. Loans are there in all stages, but they're just very different on each stage. Government subsidies. Getting some sort of grant from the government. These are tricky because they come in all forms of shapes and vary a lot from country to country. That said, they do have some things in common. They're usually available for early stage startups. There will be a lot of terms and requirements, but then again, you usually don't have to pay them back. To get access to these, you need to find what is available wherever you are. Pros: no equity loss. And a big one, no repayment. Cons: eligibility can be hard. These programs are often designed by politicians, which means they have strange and surprising requirements. Heavy bureaucracy. They can have a time-consuming application process, and sometimes they require some heavy reporting on top of that. Competitive. Surprise. There's a lot of competition for free money. Stages. These are typically early stages: idea, angel, and seed. That's it. There's a lot out there, and maybe this overview can help you find out where you should focus. Sure, traditional angel and venture journey is the most typical, but there are a lot of options out there, and most startups actually end up using more than one of these. If you want more content just like this, please consider pressing like and subscribe, and you won't miss any future videos. Thank you very much for watching Raw Startup. Now stop watching and go build something.